what if the secret to creating like a perfect laboratory-grade biological incubator is currently just, gathering dust in your garage right now, sitting right next to an old forgotten bag of fish food?
I mean, it sounds a bit absurd when you frame it like that. We are so conditioned to think of scientific discovery or, biological experimentation as something that only happens in these multi-million-dollar sterile facilities
Right.
with people wearing white coats and carrying clipboards and all that.
Exactly. But today, we're going to prove that assumption completely wrong. We're taking a deep dive into the world of a highly dedicated, everyday hobbyist to see how the most mundane household clutter can literally be weaponized for science.
Weaponized for science. I love that.
Right. So our source material today is an excerpt from a blog post. It's simply titled Notes on Gardening, Part 917.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was written by a gardener named Ang, and it's dated June 6, 2026.
That title alone, Part 917, that tells you an incredible amount about the journey we're stepping into.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, this isn't someone who just bought their first trowel last weekend.
No kidding. It implies a massive ongoing catalog of trial and error. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore how a really simple gardening experiment reveals the incredibly delicate biological balance required to spark new life.
Right.
And beyond the biology, we are looking at how ordinary, forgotten household items can be repurposed into a highly effective scientific setup. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, I think the most compelling aspect of this source right out of the gate is the author's methodical mindset. You can really see the scientific method playing out on, like, a kitchen counter or a back porch.
Yeah.
Eng isn't just following instructions printed on a label, Eng is observing, forming hypotheses, and vigorously testing them.
And testing them on something very specific, which is where this whole story really kicks off. We have to look at the raw material Eng is working with here.
Yeah.
The subject of this experiment is a batch of seeds for the peacock flower.
Yes. The botanical name is Caesalpinia pulcherrima.
Caesalpinia pulcherrima, exactly. A beautiful plant.
A truly stunning plant. And Eng specifically notes working with the reddish, orangish variety.
Beautiful, yes. But here is the detail that, for me, changes the whole trajectory of the post. Eng didn't order these online.
Right.
They didn't pick up a glossy, barcode stamped a packet at the local hardware store. Eng harvested these peacock flower seeds directly from the wild.
Which fundamentally alters the entire nature of the challenge.
Right. To me, foraging wild seeds rather than buying packets is like trekking into a forest to source raw, wild ingredients instead of just, ordering a pre-portioned meal kit to your front door.
That's a great way to put it.
With the meal kit or the store-bought seed packet, you get a guarantee. You get standardized instructions, a known expiration date, and the seeds have probably been, chemically treated or genetically selected for maximum foolproof success. The wild harvest is basically the Wild West.
That is an incredibly accurate comparison. I mean, the source material specifically notes the unpredictability inherent here. Wild seeds haven't been coddled in a temperature-controlled warehouse.
Not at all.
They are raw nature. And that means they come with built-in evolutionary defense mechanisms. Specifically, they have complex dormancy requirements and highly variable viability.
Wait, let's pause there for a second, because break down what you mean by those two terms. They sound like serious hurdles.
Yeah.
What does variable viability and a dormancy requirement actually look like for a gardener?
Okay, let's take variable viability first. If you buy a packet of commercial seeds, almost every single one is guaranteed to be biologically capable of sprouting. They are viable.
Because they've been tested and sorted.
Exactly. But in the wild, maybe a third of the seeds on a plant are just duds.
Oh, wow.
Maybe another third have microscopic insect damage that you can't even see. So you are already working with a significantly compromised batch.
Okay, so the success rate is a gamble, literally from the start. What about the dormancy requirement?
This is where plant biology gets incredibly clever. A wild seed has evolved so that it doesn't accidentally sprout at the wrong time.
Right, because that would be fatal.
Exactly. If a seed drops in November, it doesn't want to germinate during, an unseasonably warm week, only to be killed by a hard freeze in December. So the plant engineers the seed coat to be incredibly tough, or it builds in chemical inhibitors.
So it's actively resisting.
Yes. The seed demands a very specific set of environmental triggers. Maybe that's a heavy, sustained period of moisture to simulate spring rains, or maybe it's a chemical breakdown that only happens after it passes through an animal's digestive tract. It is actively refusing to grow until conditions are perfect.
So you are dealing with a biological vault that refuses to open unless you enter the exact right passcode.
Exactly. And because of that wild unpredictability, Ang decides a standard approach just isn't enough here. The author sets up a side-by-side controlled experiment to crack that passcode.
The two-pronged attack.
Yes. Ang is testing two completely different approaches to getting these wild seeds to germinate.
Right, so on one side, Ang uses the classic paper towel method, and on the other, Ang introduces this newer water-soaking technique.
Correct.
Now, as someone trying to understand the psychology of this hobbyist, I have to push back a little here.
Okay.
If you have this precious, hard-won, wild-forged seed, why risk it on a completely new method? I mean, the damp paper towel in a plastic bag is the undisputed champion of seed starting.
It really is the classic.
Anyone who took second-grade science knows it. You wet the paper towel, you put the bean in the bag, you tape it to the window. Why deviate from the tried and true?
Well, that question gets right to the heart of why some hobbyists evolve into innovators. The paper towel method is the status quo, and it works for a vast majority of common seeds.
Yeah.
But testing the status quo against a new variable is the absolute foundation of scientific discovery. Ang isn't satisfied with merely hoping the standard way works.
So it's about not accepting good enough when you're dealing with an unknown variable, like a wild seed.
Exactly. Ang recognizes that this specific Caesalpinia pulcherrimus seeds might have physical traits that the paper towel method just can't accommodate.
Huh.
By running a side-by-side comparison, Ang is generating localized, highly specific data. It's the mindset of someone asking, can we engineer a better environment than the one we've always just accepted?
So if wild seeds often reject the standard paper towel treatment, what physical environment do they actually need to wake up? Because the way Ang describes this alternative water-soaking method sounds totally counterintuitive to me.
It does sound a bit contradictory at first.
It's almost a contradiction in terms. I mean, Ang writes that the setup requires a long, tall glass jar, but then the post explicitly states that water-soaking, in this context, means adding just the bare minimum amount of water to keep the seeds moist.
Right.
And then you cover the jar with a plastic cup that has an opening cut into it. I'm stuck on the phrasing here. If it is literally called the water-soaking method, why are we only using the bare minimum water? Doesn't the word soaking imply fully submerging the seed? Like soaking dishes in a sink?
Yes, what's fascinating here is that the terminology obscures the high-level biology taking place. You're completely right. Normally, soaking implies dropping something into a glass of water and just walking away.
Yeah, drowning it, basically.
But if you fully submerge a biological organism, like
Yeah.
a seed, for too long, you literally drown it. We forget that seeds are living, breathing entities. They undergo cellular respiration.
Oh, wow.
So what Ang has constructed here isn't a soaking bath at all. Ang has engineered a highly precise, tunable microclimate.
Like a custom atmospheric chamber in a jar.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of what is actually happening inside that jar. By adding just that bare minimum splash of water, Ang ensures the seed has direct access to hydration without being submerged.
Okay.
That tiny amount of water begins to evaporate within the enclosed space of the tall glass jar, which drives up the internal humidity to near 100%.
Okay, so it's incredibly humid in there, but it's not underwater. But then what is the point of the plastic cup on top? And more importantly, why does it need a hole in it?
That plastic cup with the opening is acting as a crucial pressure and gas valve.
Oh, the valve.
Yeah. If Ang just screwed a metal lid onto that damp jar, all the moisture would be trapped. It would be a sealed box.
Right.
But that little opening in the cup traps the majority of the humidity inside while still allowing for vital aeration. It permits gas exchange.
Ah, I see.
It lets fresh oxygen flow down into the jar, and it lets excess stagnant moisture escape out the top.
It sounds like Ang is forcing the seed to walk a really intense biological tightrope.
It is the ultimate core conflict of seed germination, and it's playing out entirely inside household glassware. You are constantly battling two opposing forces here.
What are the forces?
Well, on one side, you desperately need high, consistent moisture to penetrate that tough, wild seed coat we talked about earlier. You need water to trigger the biological signals that tell the root to emerge.
Right, because without water, it just stays dormant forever. It's basically a rock.
Exactly. But on the other side of the tightrope, if you have all that moisture and zero aeration, like a stagnant, sealed, wet environment, you have essentially created a five-star resort for mold and fungal pathogens.
Oh, ew.
Mold thrives in stagnant dampness. It will overrun and digest the seed long before the root ever gets a chance to form.
Ah, I see. So the tall jar and the minimal water provide the essential humidity to wake the seed up, but that plastic cup with the hole is providing the crucial airflow to fight off the mold.
It is a delicate, perfectly engineered balance, and according to Ang's notes, the results really speak for themselves. The seeds are germinating remarkably well under this misnamed water-soaking approach.
Which brings up a really interesting causality. If this specific microclimate is so effective, who is checking into this room?
Right.
Ang makes a very pointed observation about the results. The Post notes that this glass jar method is a fantastic alternative specifically for large seeds.
Yes, large seeds.
And even beyond seeds, Ang says this tall jar method has proven incredibly effective for any form of propagation, particularly plant cuttings.
Because the physical size and the biological demands of the subject completely dictate the environment it requires to survive.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about a large seed for a second. It requires this exact, precise atmospheric balance of water and oxygen just to wake up. It actually reminds me of trying to start a combustion engine.
Okay, I like where this is going.
If you have a tiny little lawnmower engine, you can basically just yank the cord and it stutters to life. It's simple. But a massive, heavy-duty industrial engine, it demands a highly specific, perfectly calibrated fuel-to-air mixture just to turn over and catch that initial spark.
That is a phenomenal analogy for cellular respiration. The moisture is the fuel, the aeration is the air mixture, and the germination itself is the spark.
Exactly. If your mixture is too rich, like if you flood the engine with too much fuel and not enough air, it won't start. In our jar, that's the water overwhelming the seed and the mold taking over.
Right.
If the mixture is too lean, all air, and no fuel, there's no combustion. The seed just sits there bone dry. A large seed, just like a large engine, is demanding a perfect ratio. But why does the size of the seed make the paper towel method fail so badly?
Well, to understand why the paper towel fails the large seed, we really have to look at the physics of the surface area to volume ratio.
Okay, lay it on me.
A paper towel folded inside a plastic bag is inherently a flat, highly restrictive environment. It has almost zero volumetric space. Now, for a tiny seed, let's say a tomato seed, which is the size of a pinhead, that flat, damp environment is totally fine.
Right.
A tiny seed has a lot of surface area relative to its tiny internal volume, so it can easily absorb the trace amounts of oxygen that are filtering through the wet paper.
It doesn't need much air to breathe, basically.
Exactly. But a large seed has a massive internal volume of endosperm. The endosperm is the starchy food supply the seed burns as fuel to push out its first root.
Like the fuel tank.
Right. And to burn that massive amount of fuel, the large seed requires a massive oxygen payload. If you take a large, bulky seed and tightly wrap it in a soaking wet paper towel, the water actually forms a seal around the seed coat.
Oh, wow. So the wet paper towel isn't just failing to help. It's actively suffocating the seed. It's blocking the oxygen transfer.
Precisely. The large seed is literally gasping for air inside that wet paper jacket.
That is wild.
And the tall glass jar completely solves this biological bottleneck. It provides volumetric airspace. The seed gets all the hydration it needs from the ambient humidity, but it sits totally unencumbered in an oxygen-rich environment.
It has the physical room to breathe and the physical room to push out a thicker initial root structure without just hitting the side of a plastic bag.
Yeah, and that exact same physical principle applies to why Ang is finding so much success using these jars for plant cuttings, too.
Oh, let's clarify that real quick for everyone. A cutting is just a piece of a stem with a few leaves on it that you snip off a mother plant, right? And you try to force it into growing its own new roots.
Correct. And a cutting is an incredibly vulnerable thing. It has leaves that are constantly losing moisture to the air through transpiration, but it has absolutely no roots yet to drink up replacement water.
Right, it's cut off from the supply.
Exactly. If the air around it is dry, the cutting just shrivels and dies in a matter of hours. So the tall glass jar acts as a miniature greenhouse.
Oh, I see.
It surrounds those leaves with a stable, highly humid microclimate so they don't dry out, while the opening in the cup ensures the stem doesn't rot from stagnant air.
It really is amazing how such a simple physical object can be so perfectly suited for these complex biological jobs.
It is.
Which makes you wonder, Where do you get a bunch of highly specific, tall, volumetric glass jars? I mean, you'd think Aang is ordering specialized botanical glassware from some laboratory supply
Yeah,
catalog.
then so, yeah.
But the post reveals a deeply resourceful twist. Aang casually drops the detail that they are repurposing these jars. And what were they used for previously? They used to house betta fish.
It's one of the most revealing and honestly humanizing details in the entire post.
And it's not just one or two jars. Aang notes that they have well over 50 of these long, dormant glass jars lying around the house. Over 50.
Over 50 betta fish jars. It paints quite a vivid picture of the author's history, doesn't it?
Definitely. So what does this all mean? We have a massive collection of 50 dormant fish jars that are suddenly being drafted into service as a botanical laboratory.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really highlights the fascinating evolution of a passionate hobbyist. Think about the timeline and the psychology implied here.
Okay.
At some point in the past, Aang, or maybe someone in Aang's household, was deeply, fiercely invested in betta fish. To possess over 50 individual jars specifically for housing betta fish implies a level of dedication, perhaps competitive breeding or keeping, that goes way beyond casual pet ownership.
Oh, absolutely. You definitely don't accidentally acquire 50 betta fish jars.
Yeah.
That represents a distinct era of someone's life.
It was an era. But human passions shift. The fish are gone. And what remains is the physical infrastructure of that past hobby, these 50 long dormant jars.
Right.
Now, it is incredibly common for the physical remnants of our past interests to just become a source of guilt. They become clutter, gathering dust in a garage or a closet, reminding us of something we gave up or moved on from. We look at them and think, oh, I should really throw those away.
I have a closet full of old camera gear that makes me feel exactly like that. But Aang doesn't see guilt or clutter. Aang exhibits a wonderfully resourceful mindset.
Yes. Instead of viewing these jars as useless artifacts of a bygone phase, Aang looks at their physical properties. They're tall, they're glass, they're capable of holding water, and Aang sees raw potential. Aang turns this dormant clutter into an active incubator for life.
It's taking the literal empty vessels of a past passion and using them to physically spark the growth of a brand new passion.
It is deeply poetic, but more importantly, it is highly practical. And the blog post shows that Aang is already looking toward the future. The source notes that Aang's very next step is to test these exact betta jar methods on other plant species.
Oh, really?
Yeah, specifically seeds that were recently acquired during a field trip to plant centers and commercial nurseries.
So they are taking the experiment out of the wild and into the commercial sector.
Exactly. This is the hallmark of a true scientific experimenter. You achieve a localized, specific success, like cracking the dormancy code of the wild harvested peacock flower, and you immediately try to scale it.
You want to push the boundaries.
Right. You ask the next logical question. Okay, this precise microclimate worked for a notoriously difficult wild seed. Will it work just as well for a domesticated commercial seed? Will it work for a completely different species I bought at a nursery?
So Aang is taking the data generated from a wild seed in a fish jar and applying it to a broader botanical landscape.
It's a forward-looking approach that ensures the experiment never actually ends. It just iterates and evolves. Those 50 jars aren't just a solution. They are a platform for endless future tests.
It is just a fantastic journey from start to finish. Let's take a quick step back and recap the ground we've covered through this one short blog excerpt.
Sure.
We started with Aang taking a wild foraged peacock flower seed, bringing something raw, uncoddled, and biologically stubborn right out of the wild. Then, Aang actively chooses to bypass the universally accepted standard of the damp paper towel in favor of testing a new variable.
Right, challenging the status quo to overcome the specific physical limitations of large seeds.
Exactly. And through that test, Aang engineers an absolutely perfect microclimate out of an old repurposed betta fish jar, balancing just a bare minimum splash of water to provide the fuel of humidity, and utilizing a simple plastic cup with a hole cut into it to provide the essential aeration.
Navigating that biological tightrope, providing the oxygen payload required for large seeds to perform cellular respiration, preventing the mold from taking over and forcing the root to finally emerge.
And doing it all with discarded clutter. I think it's crucial to explicitly state why this matters to you, the listener. It is so easy to look at the world of science or biological innovation, or even just high-level successful gardening, and assume you need an endless budget or specialized laboratory equipment to participate.
You really don't.
You don't.
This deep dive proves that innovation is fundamentally a mindset, not a budget. The core principles of scientific observation, of carefully balancing variables like moisture and aeration, of understanding the why behind a failure, and of creatively repurposing the resources you already have at your disposal, these are universal, accessible tools.
Absolutely.
You can apply this methodical, curious approach to absolutely any passion, problem, or roadblock in your own life. You don't need a sterile lab to make a breakthrough discovery. Sometimes you just need an understanding of the mechanics, an old fish jar, and a plastic cup.
Which brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with today. We want you to ponder this entirely on your own. Think about Aang's journey and that massive collection of betta jars. If a dusty, dormant fish jar can be completely conceptually transformed into the perfect, carefully aerated microclimate to spark new life from a stubborn, wild seed,
Yeah.
what other dormant containers, discarded habits, or forgotten spaces in your own life are sitting around right now, secretly waiting to be the perfect incubator for your next big project?